Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the case file on what is, without a doubt, one of the most infamous, chilling, and honestly heavily mythologized crimes in American history, the 1947 murder of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. It's a case that's literally baffled investigators for over 75 years now. We're talking gruesome forensic details, an absolute media frenzy, a taunting killer, and some seriously deep allegations of police corruption. So we're going to break down exactly what happened, step by step, using the actual historical evidence.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because before we go back to the beginning, I want you to listen to this wild transcript. This is from a secret LAPD wiretap planted in 1950 inside the home of a prominent Los Angeles doctor named George Hodel. Listen to that arrogance, right? Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. To really understand how a prime suspect could just casually boast about this horrific crime and never face a trial, we need to jump back to where this whole nightmare began.
Section 1. The gruesome discovery. So let's set the scene. It's post-war, 1940s Los Angeles. It's a gritty city filled with people hoping to make a fresh start, or, strike it big, including a young woman from Massachusetts named Elizabeth Short. Now, let's walk through the timeline of that cold January morning. Medical examiners later estimated that Short died sometime during the evening of January 14th, or maybe the early hours of the 15th. Fast forward to 10 a.m. on January 15th. A local housewife, Betty Berzinger, is just out for a walk with her kid down Norton Avenue in the Limert Park neighborhood, which was pretty undeveloped at the time. She glances into a vacant lot and spots something on the grass. It's so pale, so pallid and white, she actually thinks it's a discarded store mannequin. But as she gets closer, the horrifying reality sets in. It isn't a mannequin at all. It is a severed human corpse. She immediately runs to get the cops.
Now, what's really interesting, and honestly totally baffling, about this dump site is that what shocked the seasoned LAPD detectives wasn't just the severe mutilation, it was the complete and utter lack of blood. The body had been entirely drained, wiped completely clean, and then meticulously transported to this location. The killer had very deliberately posed her there.
Section 2. Anatomy of a murder.
The sheer visceral shock of the discovery quickly gave way to a deeply clinical and honestly highly disturbing forensic investigation led by LA County Coroner Frederick Newbar. The defining feature of this crime obviously was the bisection of the victim's body. But you have to understand, this wasn't some haphazard hacking. The autopsy revealed the body had been cut completely in half using a highly specific medical procedure called a hemicorporectomy. The spine had been expertly transected right between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Plus, the coroner noted almost no bruising along the incision line, which proved this completely clean professional cut was done post-mortem. Right away, investigators knew they were likely hunting someone with advanced surgical or medical skills.
But here's the bizarre contradiction. That clinical surgical precision was paired with brutal, sadistic mutilation. The killer had slashed the victim's face from the corners of her mouth all the way out to her ears. In criminal profiling and forensic terminology, this horrific disfigurement is known as a Glasgow smile.
Let's run through the rapid-fire facts from the official autopsy. The victim was a 22-year-old female, 5 feet 5 inches tall, just 115 pounds. Interestingly, despite the post-mortem bisection, the official cause of death was actually hemorrhage and shock from lacerations and severe blows to the head and face. The lower half of her body was positioned about a foot away from the upper half, and her intestines had actually been tucked neatly beneath her buttocks. She was posed with her hands up over her head and her legs apart. But, and this is a massive but, despite the extreme, highly sexualized nature of how she was posed, there was zero sperm present. Absolutely no physical evidence of rape.
So, who was she? Well, to identify the victim, police took fingerprints at the morgue and kicked them over to the FBI. And they got lucky, because she'd worked as a civilian employee at a California Army base during the war, and she had a prior minor arrest record from 1943. Her prints were already on file. The match came back incredibly fast. Suddenly, the victim officially had a name: Elizabeth Short.
Section 3. The Avenger's taunts.
The second Elizabeth Short was identified, the press descended on this story like wildfire. The killer practically invited it, deciding it was the perfect time to step into the spotlight. Papers like the Los Angeles Examiner and the Herald Express heavily sensationalized everything. Because Elizabeth supposedly had striking dyed black hair and a rumored preference for wearing sheer black clothing, the media, or possibly local bar patrons depending on who you ask, dubbed her the Black Dahlia. It was a clever, dark play on the recent 1946 film noir The Blue Dahlia. And that name, it immediately gripped the entire nation, totally transforming a deeply human tragedy into this lurid, headline-grabbing mystery. Then, on January 24th, things get even more theatrical. A suspicious manila envelope is delivered, addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and a few other papers. And get this, the words on the envelope were literally cut out from newspaper clippings and pasted together like a movie ransom note. It read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The killer was cutting out the middleman and communicating directly with the press.
So, the crucial point here isn't just what was inside that envelope, which was Short's birth certificate, her business cards, some photos, and an address book embossed with the name Mark Hansen. The real kicker is how all of this was treated. Every single item inside that envelope had been completely wiped down with gasoline to erase the fingerprints. The killer meticulously washed the evidence, exactly like they had meticulously washed the victim's body.
And the taunts just kept coming. A handwritten letter arrived shortly after, claiming the killer would actually turn himself in on January 29th. So the police waited at the designated spot, and of course, the killer is a no-show. Instead, the newspaper receives another cut-and-paste note that basically says, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified."
Section 4. The Prime Suspects. By now, you can imagine the LAPD is sweating. They have this massive national profile case on their hands, and the pressure to solve it is just immense. The sheer scale of the investigation was absolutely staggering. Over 150 men were formally investigated. A huge number of people actually walked into police stations to falsely confess to the crime just to get their names in the paper, which forced the cops to waste precious time debunking them. But as investigators waded through all that noise, 3 key figures really started to emerge from the shadows. Let's break them down. First up, Mark Hansen. He was a wealthy local nightclub and theater owner in LA. Remember that address book the killer mailed to the papers? Yeah, it belonged to Hansen. Elizabeth Short had actually stayed at his home with some friends, and according to Short's roommate, she had very recently rejected Hansen's sexual advances, which of course gives him a pretty solid potential motive. Hansen was eventually cleared by police, but historians are quick to point out that he had deep underworld connections and serious ties to corrupt LAPD officers, which raises some major red flags about why they dismissed him so quickly. But the 2 really heavy hitters in the suspect pool, let's compare these 2. First, Leslie Dillon. He was working as a bellhop, but crucially, he was a former mortician's assistant. That means he absolutely knew how to bleed and bisect a human body. He seemed to know incredibly intimate details of the crime, but the investigation into him was allegedly squashed by a corrupt lead detective named Sergeant Finis Brown. Then we have Dr. George Hodel, a highly intelligent, well-connected surgeon who possessed the exact medical skills required to pull off a flawless hemicorporectomy. His own son later discovered he had purchased bags of concrete matching the exact type found at the crime scene. And of course, the LAPD literally caught him on a wiretap saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia." And this brilliantly illustrates the real tragedy of the investigation. Both these men had the necessary skills, and shockingly, both seemed to benefit from a profoundly corrupt 1940s LAPD that just let them slip away.
Section 5. An enduring cold case.
Decades are past, but the public's fascination with this tragic story, it has never faded. But before we wrap this up, we absolutely have to separate the human being from the Hollywood myth. For decades, tabloids painted her as a glamorous movie star or a lurid prostitute or claimed she was strangled. The facts are just much sadder and much more grounded. Grand jury files firmly confirm she was not a prostitute. She had 0 acting credits. Elizabeth Short was really just a struggling 22-year-old kid, surviving on her wits far away from home, who tragically died of hemorrhage and shock at the hands of an absolute monster.
Which leaves us with a final, massive, lingering question. Did the killer actually escape because the LAPD truly lacked the hard evidence to convict? Or did the massive, well-documented corruption of 1940s Los Angeles actively shield the true murderer from justice? When you have prime suspects like Dillon and Hodel somehow slipping through the cracks, it's a question that keeps the fire of this cold case burning even today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer to unpack the dark and absolutely fascinating evidence behind the Black Dahlia. Until next time, keep questioning the facts.